Okay, we'll see if, I hope my slides don't move around on me as they did for Larry. Let's see here. Forward and back, perhaps. Perfect. Okay. I'm not used to being trapped behind a lectern, and I don't typically read what I'm presenting. So I made myself a few notes just so I could hit some highlights, and I will probably move around a little bit, but nobody ever accused me of having a quiet voice. So I'm co-director of the Larry Green Center. We have a byline. It means a whole lot for us. We spent about a year coming up with it, my partner in crime, Dr. Kurt Stengy. We are about advancing primary health care for the public good. The purpose of our center is actually to spend time thinking and in reflection. We are interested in answering the questions that are most important to the field of primary care and of family medicine in particular. There are very few ways in which we actually get to ask the questions that are important to family docs. I was interested in figuring out what are the questions that we actually need to identify and how do we best answer them. That's what we set out to do. So I'm going to ask you for a moment here. I'm going to be a little different. You'll find out that that's kind of my thing. I'm going to say, can you take a moment? I know you're at a conference. We're in a big room. But just take a moment and be present with me. I just want you to really think about what it is we're going to be talking about this morning. Take it in and reflect. Pretend for a moment that you and I share the values of family medicine, about establishing a relationship and being present with each other as we do so. I'll even cut you some slack. I'll cut right to the punchline. So if you lose your focus, because it's hard, if you lose your focus over time, at least you know the main things that you need to come away with. The unshakable truths of family medicine. That is that family medicine is relational. Now, I know we're all saying these things, and you may even start to have a little fatigue of hearing it, but the truth is, it's coming up as a moment, and we talk about it a lot because it's getting lost. It is not secondary to what we do. It's not contextual to what we do. It is the core of our profession. Being there and being present, connecting with people, holding the social and the scientific together in a coherent whole, understanding that that is how health is won and lost. That's what it means for us. We have a social contract. That social contract says that I, as a physician, will be worthy of your trust. I will be worthy of your trust because I will be guided by a moral norm based on my profession, one that requires that I put the patient first, that I ignore all that background noise of the everyday, of the regulation, of the policy, of the paperwork, of the hassles. I put the patient first. So I think establishing a relationship, building some rapport is a little bit about also being willing to be vulnerable. So I'm going to take a moment here and I'm going to be a little vulnerable with you. In this picture, taken in my office, is my friend Will. Will is a great guy. You know, it's a pretty special thing when you get to take your professional work and bring in a personal friend to work with you. And I got to do that. And Will worked with us as a consultant. His day gig was working in the CIO office of the Federal Reserve Bank. But on his off time, he worked with us, helping to make sense of 660,000 free text comments, a data set that the Board of Family Medicine had given us. It was just a fabulous study. This was fall of 2015. This is Will in April of 2016, about 72 hours before he passed away. He died from liver failure. He was 40 years old, and these are his beautiful children. About 3 months previous, his ex-wife passed away from a blood clot. She did not have health insurance, and although she knew, because she had a clotting illness, although she knew that she had a blood clot, she was kind of hoping it would just go away because she was worried about the cost of going to the ED. So these kids now are taken care of by a wide family of adults but lost their 2 biological parents within the span of about 4 years. So I want to actually skip you back about 5 years before we met Will, as understanding part of his story. So 5 years previous, I was working in New Jersey at the Robert Wood Johnson Medical School for a great guy, Ben Crabtree, a wonderful mentor. And he was approached by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation because they were interested in investing in primary care in general. And they wanted to know if we could help them figure out where the leading edge of innovation was. It should have come here, right? Where's the leading edge of innovation? They actually asked us, can you tell us, because we want to know how to spend our money. Now listen, I know many of you out there are students. This is a really great gig if you can get it, right? You get a foundation coming to you saying, how do we spend our money? It was fabulous. So they wanted the traditional good work, so we did that, a very exhaustive lit review. But as we were doing the lit review and meeting with them regularly, it was so plain. You know, it was so clear. God, what's happening in practice is really not in the literature. If you want to understand how to do excellent care, you need to look at everyday people and everyday practices. And I couldn't believe it because I was a cultural anthropologist and they're all doctors, but they actually believed me and they took me up on the idea. So then they asked if we could identify a cohort of 200 exemplary primary care practices. 200. They should be high quality, clinically excellent settings doing something different with their care. So we did that too. We compared them and it was really startling. Now, I don't know if you're really familiar, but most of the reform that we're doing right now in healthcare is happening through grants. This is not a sustainable solution. We have to figure out a better way to improve healthcare. What happens when you do that? Well, your questions are no longer guided by the person in front of you. They are guided by the fundable question. So we took a look at it. We said, okay, what are NIH studies funding? And not all the studies that we looked at were NIH. We looked at 4,400 abstracts, 350 publications, and 17 different fully funded initiatives. We really did go far. So there's a lot of foundation work in there too. But what we found was really quite simple. Funded studies were based on good science. The scientific framework over the social. And the good science said, identify the gap in the research, right? That's what we did. Identify the gap in the research. We design a study through which we provide a wonderful targeted intervention supported by a totally unsustainable resource, the grant. And when the grant's over, that thing's gone. We rely on practices to help us out. So, oh my God, we know how much fire they're under. We do not want to disrupt them at all. We want to convince them to participate. We want it not to be hard on them, so we plan for minimal disruption. And it's a funder, right? So it's disease-based. We target a particular illness. We look for that mythical creature known as the diabetic patient who has no other conditions. So how does that compare to what was going on in practices? It's very different. You all know this. Even as students, you've been in practices, you know what's going on there. Certainly the teachers out there know what's going on there. We don't focus on gaps in the literature. We look at our practice. We look at the community in which it's located. We look at the environment. We identify a gap in front of us. We find a solution that is organic to the context. It's where people live, work, and play, right? So we identify something organic to the context, and we don't go for minimal disruption. We go for optimal impact. What's the very best that we can do? We put people first as we design these interventions. That's the kind of practice I want to be in. Now, we only have a limited amount of time today, so I'm not going to give you all the examples of the practices I found. I'm just going to give you two. And the first one is really one of my favorites, the tax clinic. Now, seriously, I asked you to be here and to be present with me for a minute, and so here's part of that, right? Just take a heartbeat, spend a few heartbeats, and think about, when's the last time you thought of a primary care practice having a tax clinic? It's kind of unusual. I was talking to a practice that was located near Section 8 housing. This is most of their patients earn less than $10,000 a year. The practice happened to notice that none of them, as they were in April, were turning in taxes, right? They figured, I don't earn enough to have to pay taxes. What's the point? They didn't know about earned income tax credits. So the practice got some volunteer high school students to come in and help their patients turn in 1040 easy forms. That year, 1 year, they brought in $7 million in tax refunds. A community in which they earn less than 10 grand a year, and they brought in 7 million. If that's not working on social drivers of health, I don't know what it is, right? If these are easy things to do, you can do them in a financially hostile environment. It doesn't take an FQHC with lots and lots of staff to make this happen. The second program was also really cool for me. I picked money ones in particular because everybody focuses on money. I like to focus on the things that look familiar and make them a little unfamiliar. That's what anthropologists do. So the second one was called the More Than Money program. It was fantastic. A practice that was on the edge of an industrialized area, working class community. During the fall, you all remember the fall, right? I know some of you are older, but some of you are younger. When the market crashed, right? I guess we call it a Great Recession. I think of it as a crash. That's what it felt like to me. Unemployment in 2010 in this community was at 23%. And the FQHC noticed that their patients weren't coming in. People couldn't even afford the $10 copay. They were most worried about their chronic patients, their patients with chronic conditions who were no longer coming in to be monitored and who were no longer buying their medications. The practice got together to solve this problem. They weren't funded. They simply wanted to look at their community, and they decided this was a relationship broken. That's family medicine. This was a relationship broken. So they created the More Than Money program. Here's what it was. It's still going on, by the way. They told all their patients, they called them up on the phone, the people who weren't coming in. They actually, used voice, called them on the phone, no mass email. And they said, listen, we have this new program. If you are a new parent and you want to take new parenting classes, if you don't have a high school diploma and you'd like to take some GED classes, or if you just want to do some volunteer work with one of the local nonprofits, call this number. You'll talk to a person, it will be a nurse, and she will credit you $10 an hour that you report on your healthcare bill. And they told me, you wouldn't believe it, all these people started coming back in. And I was a little naive, and I said, well, yeah, it's a really good deal. You are both providing the care now and paying for it. I can imagine they would come back in. And the CEO of the system, it's really a line I will never forget. He said, it turns out if you invest in the community, they invest in you. So what he said was that his accountants were not so crazy about this plan, the More Than Money program, in which they would provide the care and pay for it. So they actually tracked what it was going to cost the practice. And what they found over the course of the first year is that they earned money on the deal. So if you're in an FQHC, any practice, but particularly an FQHC, you carry what we call a debt load, right? A certain amount of unpaid receivables, let's say. During the greatest recession of our history, this FQHC had the lowest debt load in its 30-year run. The people in the community who had commercial insurance knew what this practice was doing. It started going to them rather than to other practices. Their patients, when they had only a few dollars to spend, prioritized spending it on the practice that they knew had their back. This program continues to be wonderful and to thrive. That is what it means to repair a broken relationship. It's what family medicine is. Now, there was a conversation hanging in the background of all these things that was really and truly like a low-level scream, just kind of almost silently but eerily, you could hear it too, going across the horizon. And that was, these had to be clinically excellent, high-quality practices. Well, how the heck do you prove that? We're supposed to use measures. All of these practices, I had to ask them, what measures do you use? What do your measures look like? I hated it, they hated it. And what they basically said was, oh yeah, we do that. But you know what? Those measures don't tell us anything about whether or not our patients are experiencing any benefit, and they don't actually help us to learn. So we have this other thing that we do on the side. And I became absolutely fascinated by that. That's the thing for me, for the olders in the crowd, Paul Harvey, the rest of the story, that for me was the rest of the story. That's what I wanted to look at. The accountability conversation is confusing. Accountability should be a good thing. It seems like it would be a good thing. It is used in measures not such a good way. It kind of feels threatening, doesn't it? We say, I am going to hold you accountable for how you spend your time. I'm just not going to give you the ability to decide how you want to spend it. I'm going to determine for you what's a valuable use of your time or not. I'm going to hold you accountable for high quality, but I am not going to let you or the people who come to see you or the potential benefit that they feel to determine what quality is. I'm going to determine that through some other mechanism. I'm going to hold you accountable for the health of the people who come into your practice, even though we know 20% of health is touched by the medical field. 80% happens elsewhere. It's kind of confusing. I'm going to give you a break. I'm going to only hold you accountable for those things for which you can be directly in control of. I seriously, I want to know what those things are. So does my mother, by the way, because she hasn't been able to control me for years. I'm only going to hold you accountable for the things that I can hold you directly responsible for. What the heck is that? Well, we're going to base it on transactions and billing. That must be what you're all about. That's how we record our data. Not so much. Accountability, the accountability conversation is usually a reflection of a lost trust, right? What are we really saying? Anthropology, we like to go beneath the surface. What's really going on here? We usually say, you know what? I'm going to let you know that I'm holding you accountable because I don't trust you're going to do what you're supposed to do. And I'm going to tell you what you need to do, and I'm going to hold your feet to the fire on it. I want to speak to the students in here in particular, and I want to speak to the people who are teaching them. And I want to say, accountability is important. I expect more. Accountability is not enough. Responsibility is what family medicine is about. We are responsible for our patients. We are responsible for the communities in which we are located. We are responsible for the health of our members. Our members are wide-ranging. We aren't only held accountable, we are responsible. If you frame the conversation around accountable, it is not a conversation invested in relationships. It is not a conversation invested in a social contract. It is a conversation that says, fine, you want to hold me accountable? Well then, this is my patient panel and I will only be held accountable to them. You can only judge me on the people who appear on my panel, only the ones that are active, only the ones who come in at certain times, only ones that you can attribute to me. It is a constant shrinking of our professional moral code, the people in front of us. What if accountability were about being responsible for people in the communities in which they live, work, and play? Measures is at the root of this particular drama as it unfolds in our political life. Measures are the means by which we say what's important. They actually are self-definition, right? You all, I don't care who you are or what job you hold, I'm sure we have people in here who are not in the medical profession. You can think about this too. When you are judged based on criteria that have nothing to do with your day-to-day, That doesn't feel good. When you are told what's most valued about you has nothing to do with the care that you deliver, that doesn't feel right. That's not the moral norm that guides our profession, that's relational, that holds people first. Measures provide us a sense of aspiration. They don't just tell us if we've done a good job, they tell us to where we should be going. They vector us in the right direction. They let us know what our potential is for doing better and doing more. It is continual learning. It is not about hitting a target. A measure that is a target is no longer a measure. Targets show you how far below you are. Measures offer you guidance of where you want to be and how far you can go to get there. They are communication with a purpose. So if the measures that we have don't work, if they are not based in our field and not based in relationships, but rather based in diseases, in process, then we need to start over. If I'm building a house, I'm not going to build it on a crappy foundation. I'm going to start new. I want it to be based on the strength of what I do. So we learned by asking the right questions. We sent out surveys. We surveyed over 1,000 stakeholders. What is most important to you in primary care? How do you know when you've gotten good care? What does that look like? How would you assess it? What we found out was really quite interesting. About 38% overlap between what is currently measured and what we actually hold as important. Now, I really want you to think about that for a second. 38%. That means that 62% of what we do is not measured, the things that we hold most important, right? And that 38%, it's conservative. I mean, we stretched it to make it as overlapping as we could. We also found that there was a 72% overlap between what clinicians and patients thought were important. What they held in common was that sense of human connection, the importance of it. Patients wanted personalized care, clinicians wanted human contact, not virtual, actual people, pulses and everything, sitting right in front of you. They wanted professionalism. Professionalism for the patients is about understanding this is somebody worthy of my trust. Help me to understand how to do that. But I want to know that this is somebody worthy of my trust. And for the clinicians, it was about being able to provide the care I was trained to provide. I will take care of you and anything that you bring. I will talk to you about your dreams and your goals. I will hold the scientific and the social in a coherent whole and understand that how health is won and lost is an entirely human experience. When we took all the information that we surveyed from these groups, we created a list of quality indicator areas, one that was aligned with family medicine. There were 18 of them. The next thing we did was we had to fit for purpose. Once you learn what is ideal, you also have to be able to apply it, right? It has to work in everyday life. If it doesn't work, it's just an academic exercise. So how do we create something that works in everyday life? Well, now I went to the experts in application. We had a conference of national leaders, 70 people. They represented, I don't know, it was like 18 stakeholder groups. It was patients, it was family medicine, pediatrics, internal medicine, it was social work, it was nursing, it was pharmacy, it was actuaries, it was health insurance companies, it was board certification. It was all the really high important people. You would have loved it. I know, it's hard to believe because you can see I am so formal, but you would have loved it because I got these people in a room for 2.5 days and I made them sit around tables. I did not give them talking heads. And when we opened up, I said, listen, I invited you people here, right? This is like the chief quality officer at CMS. I invited you people here because of your jobs. You are decision makers. You can move the field. You have a sphere of influence like none other, and this is your area of expertise. You know it. I'm going to ask you for the next 2.5 days to leave your day job at the door. Your day job has prevented you from doing what's right, For the next 2.5 days, we are gonna look at what's doing right. Leave it to me and my team to help you figure out how to operationalize it when it gets out. But we can no longer live through the beautiful mess that we have. There are certain things that we cannot live without, but there are also certain things that we can no longer live with. We need to figure out how to get divorced. They actually bought into it. So if you're out there and you have a jaded idea about what changes you can make, it was unbelievable. By the end of the 2.5 days, everybody agreed across all sectors, across all disciplines, everybody agreed. We'd taken the 18 areas and we limited them down to 11. And I then sat with my team and we analyzed the heck out of the data that we had. We had digital recorders on every table. We analyzed every conversation. We came up with a measure. It is called the Person-Centered Primary Care Measure. It is 11 items, it is patient reported, and as you can see, as you're looking at them on the screen, it is based in relationship. It holds the scientific and social together as a coherent whole. 1 question per area. The purpose of the measure is not to pick something apart. It is not to dissect it into its important elements and fully and totally 100% understand it. That's kind of a false precision, isn't it? It would be the same thing as if I were to assess primary care or family medicine based on disease measures. Who would think to do that? That would be foolhardy. What diseases do we see in primary care? What health concerns do we see in primary care? Can anybody create a comprehensive list for me? Right? It's everything. We see everything. To create measures of our profession based on what we see is a fool's errand. It's simply not possible. It's also not important. We don't guide our care by how people are sick or what diagnoses they have. It's the person in front of us. Comprehensiveness is not about scope of work. Comprehensiveness is not about number of problems among your patient panel. Comprehensiveness is about me saying to you, come in my door and I will handle anything that you bring. And if I don't hold the expertise required for an advanced or a particular issue you have, I will help you find somebody who can help us out, and together we'll make sense of it. This measure is about whether or not primary care is present and to what extent. It is not about what your disease is. That's kind of beside the point. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going over how we validated this instrument. If you're really interested, you can look at it online. We published it in the Annals of Family Medicine in May. It's somewhat heretical. We knew that, so you'll see in the supplementary materials we published all of our raw data in every kind of way and shape you want. You can doubt it all you want, it's all there. You can challenge it, go there. If you're a measures geek, I'm happy to have a conversation with you offline. But I will offer you just 3 important things to understand about this measure. The first is the statistical analysis. So on the top of the slide here, we have what usually happens in standard measures, and at the bottom we have our person-centered primary care measure. So first is factor analysis. Right? Do your questions appropriately load, and do they do so strongly, and is there any redundancy? And what we found was quite unusual. In order to know if you have good questions, you want a factor loading of 0.4. That's when you know you have something good. This measure, almost everything was above 0.8. Our psychometrician has a Lifetime Achievement Award in psychometrics. He's developed 30 measures nationwide. He's an international treasure, and he'd never seen anything like it. All 11 items load onto a single factor, also an anomaly. This tells us statistically what we all know in our lives, that primary care, family medicine, is broad in scope and internally coherent, that all the pieces work together as a single whole. To understand it, to be guided by measures that help you to be professional, that's what you need to do. What about the scale? Isn't this just a patient experience survey? No, in fact it's not. It is a patient assessment of whether or not primary care is present and to what extent. Patient experience surveys usually have a scale distribution like what you see at the top. We call that an asymptote, right? When mostly people just take the end and they circle it. I like this doc, I'm just gonna circle, I'm happy. Almost all scores are above 95%. This then ends up not being really something that helps us out at all. The scale distribution for this measure was quite broad. It turns out, and this is a secret, don't tell anybody, if you ask people questions that matter to them, they actually read them and answer them honestly. It's kind of funny. So the distribution really helps us to understand what are we doing well and what are we not. I was also interested in a measure that would apply anywhere. If you know your literature, you know that the graphic on the top is about the ecology of care. For every 1,000 people per month in the US who experience, for every 1,000 people in the month in the US, that larger box, about 800 experience some sort of symptom of unwellness. But not everybody goes to the doctor, right? As the boxes get smaller, it's about, do you go to the doctor and who do you go to see? And that tiny little box in the corner is the care received in primary care settings and academic health centers. It just so happens that that's where it's 2% of where people go to get care, but it's about 98% of where we do our research. This is not where I wanted my measure to come from. We wanted it to apply globally. What you won't see published in the article that we put out in May, because we just finished doing the analysis, is that this measure is now validated in 28 languages and in 35 countries. Now, I want you to just think about that for a second. Man, I know it sounds impressive. Forget about whether it sounds impressive or not. I want you to think about taking an idea, describing it using the same language, the same words, in 28 languages and in 35 countries, and it's valid? That's the strangest thing. Shouldn't it be different? They're different health systems. They have different values. It turns out that if you're actually measuring primary care, not measuring the health system and how it functions, not measuring how we can code things or how we pay for them, not measuring how we define visits, but actually measuring primary care, that relational social contract through which I have a place that I can go that will take care of the majority of my needs, understand the context in which I live, work, and play. It turns out that that's a concept that travels across boundaries. It's what primary care stands for. So I'm going to ask you again, which you would choose. Do you want to be accountable? If you are accountable, you do actually get to grow a practice. You get to be a really good technician. You can use your methods like none other. You can have a wonderful handle on the literature. You can have excellent, excellent measures. And your practice looks like a place that I would recognize and I could go. I want more. I want the relationship. I want the place that feels like it's organic to context. I want the place that looks welcoming and inviting me, that makes me feel like I belong there, that's actually grown to pay attention into the environment in which it is created. This is the primary care that I'm interested in. I want to remind you of my friend Will. I was surprised, truly, I was surprised by how much I learned from the people taking care of him in this hospital. How much I learned from them that healing was not about fixing. I'm just going to say that one more time. Healing is not about fixing. Healing is not problem solving. I use this story not just because Will taught us so much about what family medicine was about when he was around, but also because for the students out there, you may not have been in practice, but I bet you've been on a floor. I bet you've seen students, people like this. We had that wonderful What I Believe, right? These people teach us quite a bit. What makes for family medicine does not always have to be unique for family medicine. It can be guided by the medical profession. When Will was in ICU and he had about 12 hours left, and the decision to stop his life support had already been made. We were absolutely focused on that monitor, on with all the numbers and wavy lines. Oh my God, we were hyper-focused on it. His wife, my partner, we sat staring at that monitor, watching the numbers slowly decline. The people you see on the other side were his care team. They came in and they said, what are you doing? And they pushed the monitor to the side so we couldn't see it. And I gotta tell you, I was pretty pissed off. I was watching that. That was the story for me. And then he said, that's not the story. Listen, forget about the numbers. Be present. Be present. Remember your relationship. This is a healing moment for you. This is a healing moment for him. And in fact, it was. He was quite angry. Will was angry for most of his hospital stay because he was 40 years old. His kids had lost their biological mother. He did not want to die. He did not want to leave them. He worried about what would happen. They taught him how to let go, how to spend time with his kids. He didn't want his kids to come visit him. He was worried about what he looked like and the lasting image they would see. They said it's about remembering your connections. It's about purpose. Be present. So this reminded me of a conference that I had attended, the Gail Stevens Conference, what used to be called the Keystone Conference. I was asked to attend the conference and evaluate what we learned there. The conference was based around what promise would you be willing to make as a family physician. I wrote a paper called People Are Primary. It's the final main results from that conference. The promise is what I was thinking about and actually what I was writing when I was sitting at Will's bedside. Here's the promise that they made. This is the promise I'm asking you to make. I'm asking you to teach it to your students. I'm asking the students in here to pay attention to it. I'm asking that you remember in your daily professional life, systems are gonna revolve around you. They are gonna do all kinds of things. The business of medicine is one thing, and it is necessary. It's actually okay with me that people earn a living doing it. It's okay with me that the companies that pay for it actually look to earn a living while they do that too. What's not okay with me is if our profession becomes defined by that. That's not the social contract we made. The social contract we made is that I will be worthy of your trust. And I show that I am worthy of your trust because I hold you and your needs as most important. I work and toil for you regardless of the system. So the promise was, I will be there for you, attentive and fully present. I will care for you when you have no need and you don't know how to ask. I will be there for you here and now, over time and across distance, so that you can experience a wholeness and a sense of belonging. I will provide you with centered care, personal care, expert care, experiential care. And I will do so despite the economic, the technological, and the political threats to the sense of wholeness that you and I create together. Because I know you, I will use my best knowledge, best tailored, to meet our shared understanding of your goals and aspirations. These are the unshakable truths of family medicine. We hold people as complete, complex, undiminished human beings. We do so by recognizing that primary care is relational. We have a social contract with the people in our care, and we make them primary. Thank you.
just going to say, if you don't feel the revolution, you're missing the point. This is transformative. The fact that it's in all those countries, the fact that the House of Family Medicine is lining up to support this with CMS and with other purchasers, the revolution is happening. We have time for a few questions.
I got some lights staring at me too,
Yeah.
so you'll have to sort of wave your hand a little bit if you have a question. Of course, way in the back. Go ahead.
Get my microphone out.
I can hear you, Bob.
So this is great stuff. I'm Dave from Philadelphia, and my question is, this is the core of what we do. And we have all this number of measures.
You got a microphone behind you now.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
So I have all these, we're beholden to a system that still measures quality in terms of disease and moving needles and so forth. So what's the prospect of influencing those that hold the purse strings to recognize the value in other more meaningful ways?
I love that question. I'm going to try to be brief in case other people have questions. I'll tell you this. The people at that conference were the people who pay for the care, and they're excited. They want to do it. I've presented this at CMS. How do we move forward with it? We want to do it. Everybody's ready. Now, the biggest concern is, of course, that quality measures. Come on, it's like an industry. It is the Titanic, and that thing is not going to move very easily. My answer for that is really simple. Those are clinical measures. We need as many of them as we can possibly get. They're good things. Clinical measures help us to understand what's the best care that we can provide. They help us to understand when there are gaps in care. They help us to do differential diagnoses. They help us to understand what things can give a little so that we can be optimal in other things. Clinical measures are good. They are different from performance measures. Performance measures, understanding whether primary care is there, is not dependent on knowing if Larry Bauer has done his blood pressures well with his patients. We created a data system like none other. We were great at it, and we became so obsessed with it that we forgot that the purpose was not to become the very best determiners of blood pressure ever, right? The purpose was to prevent MIs. That I think that what we understand is two parts. First, the payers are crying out for it because they know the system's broken, they want to help fix it. The second is to understand that the things that people hold dear, they can still hold dear. I actually love them too. But we have to understand what the conversation is. And when you're talking about national reporting and understanding whether primary care is present, what guides us internally for our profession, you don't need the clinical measures for that. You need the quality ones for that.
Other questions?
Yeah.
Do you have any data or any information with shifting the quality measures away from the performance and more patient focus, building that relationship back with physician burnout and sort of getting back to the heart of why you go into medicine? Do you have any information with that regarding this shift?
Sure. Sure. So the question is whether or not we have any information about how shifting from the measures we currently use to something like this addresses things like physician burnout and addresses our ability to track whether we're doing good. Absolutely. So when we fielded our measure, we fielded alongside two validated instruments. One is called the Patient Enablement Index, that looks at how well patients feel that they can self-manage their care and how well they understand their illness. It positively correlated with that. There's a second validated instrument called the What Matters instrument. It's created by John Wassenaar and his team, long focused on patient-centered care, like at least 2 decades before that was sexy. And the What Matters Index speaks both retrospectively and, my favorite part, prospectively towards cost and utilization, and it's positively correlated with that. So to the first side of your question, yes, these 11 items actually do, our preliminary research shows, it does most of what we do with the other things. It turns out if you have a relationship, it actually causes healing. The second part of your question about burnout is an easy one. I often talk about burnout from the way I learned about it in the nursing literature, which is a moral injury. When we are asked and guided by all sorts of things that don't actually relate to our day-to-day, it does us harm. It's not that we're suddenly doing a whole bunch of charting that people in decades before didn't do. We're just mad about it now. We weren't as mad about it then. And I think we're mad about it because my encounter is no longer between you and me. It has a third party in there now, and it's the insurance company or the employer or other people determining what you and I should talk about. I've presented this to the AAFP, I've presented it to health systems, I've presented it to PBRNs, every clinician group I've stood in front of, they adored this. They felt like it restored their purpose and professional fulfillment. When it was presented to a group of payers, about 100 of them, they gave it a standing ovation. This is what they wanted to do too. So yeah, there's a great deal of evidence to suggest that this will help with both of those things. Yeah.
I wanted to thank you for what you and your colleagues have done to put all this together, but I'd like to tell the students in this room, this is what family medicine is about. I've been doing this for 40 years, and everything you've talked about is something that I live and practice and validates and gives me meaning. So Larry, it's not revolutionary. This is what the hell family medicine is about and what good medicine in any discipline is about. And I'm really glad that you brought it to light, but it's not news to a lot of us here. It's really reaffirming what we do every day.
So I would agree. I would add that it is revolutionary despite that. And the reason I would say that is because as a field, we haven't done enough to actually teach our next generation practitioners about these things. They don't know what they are. So we end up in situations where we stand in policy areas and we argue for 3 more cents per RVU, not understanding that it's the RVUs that's going to kill you. That if you just define the profession by transactions, because you can only define by what we capture in the coding, and if you can't put into clear, concise, and articulate language why it is that relationships matter, so that they don't get shoved to the side as a touchy-feely sort of conversation, then we'll lose our profession. That's how the future of family medicine in 2004 came to define us as a basket of services. The minute you are defined by your method, you're a technician. You are no longer a source of knowledge. So it is something that started the field, but we have lost the ability to articulate it. And because of that, in most meaningful conversations of how our field continues to be defined, we've given up ground and we need to reclaim it. Yeah.
Thank you for a brilliant and human presentation. Just brilliant. The last part of it, as far as I'm concerned, was the best poem I heard this morning.
Thank you.
That said, the question I have is how we resist the temptation and the pressure to do it wrong. We've been pushed into a place we didn't want to be for the last 40 years. How we find it in ourselves to stand up to the folks who don't know how to think about it right, how we stand up together and fight back.
That's a fabulous question, Mike. I would say at the root of that is to realize that the U.S. is big and complicated, and that the policies and systems that run it are equally big and complicated. And what I've found when sitting in on some of those policy meetings is they want to do what we want to do. They simply don't know how. And I know, and that's what I mean by we have to learn to articulate it. I know that we're short on time, but the best short story that I have to describe that is when I got to see Barbara Starfield present to the National Committee on Vital Health Statistics. So this is the group that brought you HIPAA, right? They advise presidential administrations about what we should be doing in the world of healthcare. And they were asking her and a number of experts who were cycling through, how do we measure primary care? How do we understand when something is good? And after they all finished, Barbara, the CEO of Geisinger, the CEO of Kaiser, all these big systems, after they finished, I don't even remember her name, but there was one woman who was on this committee, and she said, she stood up and she said, "Hi, I have a PhD in business from the Wharton School of Business and a PhD in economics from the London School of Economics and an MD from Harvard. My mother was in the hospital last week and I got her bill and I can't understand it. Can you tell me how to fix that? We all here, we get to make the policy. We inform the president. Tell me how to fix that. I'll do it. Just tell me." I've had that experience too at CMS. You're right about these measure things. Tell me how to do it. We'll do it. Just tell us how to do it. I think what we have to understand is that as a field born through a need to stake out ground, we've forgotten that we don't have to stake out the ground anymore. We are so focused on banging on the door that when it opens, we just continue banging. We're so used to you not liking us. We just continue in that spot and we rail and we don't realize that we got friends on the other side now. I mean, I got to talk to the Assistant Secretary of Health and Human Services. This was not somebody I had to fight. This was Karen DeSalvo. We remember her from when she helped New Orleans fix up after Katrina hit. She's amazing. She's an internal medicine person. She was right in our back pocket. She sat in large groups and said, "Listen, you primary care folks, I love you. All you need to do is come to me with a single voice about what we need to do. Don't tell me how hard it is, what all the problems are. Give me a solution and I'll do it." That's what's holding us up, Mike. We can do that. We just have to focus on it. Yeah. Last question.
Good morning. I wanted to ask you about the overlap of anthropology and family medicine. How is that important in your approach? As someone interested in anthropology, I think a lot of family medicine doctors are informal anthropologists, right?
Yes, they are.
And we don't, like in med school, we don't really get training on this.
That's right.
So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So I call our center the Larry Green Center because he was a huge mentor of mine. And that was actually the source of some of our first conversations, because I would say to Larry, listen, family medicine is doing what anthropology did 30 years ago, and it sucked for us. You could learn from it if only you would listen. We are both generalist professions. We both do that. We both focus on the particulars and the generalizable. Anthropology makes sense of how people determine significance in their world, and they translate that from one group to another. Family docs do the same thing. We take the general and the particular, and we make sense of it in the social. It's where the person and the system intersects. That's what your practice is about. Taking evidence-based care and the person in front of you and bringing them in together in a coherent whole that allows us to prioritize, personalize, and integrate care. So anthropology is really adept at doing this. We made the mistake that I'm really hoping family medicine can grow out of much faster than we did. Anthropology used to lead the planet on understanding social policy. If there were a problem around poverty, if there were a problem around race relations, Congress would pull in the anthropologists and say, tell us what to do. That sounds almost silly now. We became so enmeshed in this confusion about what it was that we studied as the world became more complex. What is this culture thing? That we defined ourselves by our method. It's how we do it. And the minute we defined ourselves by our method, we became irrelevant. We've started to repair that, re-engage with the system, but we lost a tremendous amount of ground. Same is true for family medicine. Family medicine is an incredibly rich intellectual history, and it is founded in a humanistic approach to care like none other. It has existed since shamans were taking care of people. We always need somebody who's trustworthy, that we can go to when we are most vulnerable, that will help us and respect us and hold us in a state of grace as they look at how we experience our health and how to help us in areas in which it's won and lost. Anthropology really helps with that a great deal. Thank you.